Shalom Uvracha, this is Zechariah Sprung from Yerushalayim, and we should like to speak about a very important topic which relates and associates with Elul and, of course, the Yomim Noroyim, and that is Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim, the acceptance of the yoke of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's kingdom and kingship, as well as Kabbalas Mitzvahs. So the point of departure of the Shir today will be the Rambam in Hilchos Tefilin, Perek Daled Halacha Chavov, that the Rambam states, Amru Chachomim, Kol HaKoirei Kriyas Shema B'loi Tefilin Ki Hu Meid Shekel Al Atzmoi. And of course this is the Gemara in Daf Yud Daled in Brochus, Amar Ulo, Kol HaKoirei Kriyas Shema B'loi Tefilin Ki Hu Meid Shekel Al Atzmoi. Somebody's mekayim the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema without Tefillin. So we have a very, very sharp accusation that's leveled against him. It's as if he's made sheker, he's saying false testimony on himself. Difficult to understand. So perhaps the reason for this very sharp expression of accusing oneself of false edus is on account of the fact that the mitzvahs of Tefillin are mentioned in the first two sections, the first two parshas of Kriyas Shema. We say, Kshaltom liyoyis al yodecho, v'yudot tefais beineinecho, and we also say, Kshaltom oisom lo'ois al yodechem, v'yudot tefais beineinechem. So basically, what are we doing? We're mentioning the tzivuyim, the commandments of mitzvahs Tefillin, two times in the first parasha, and also in the second parasha. So therefore, since we're dealing with someone who is surely capable of fulfilling the mitzvah, and yet recites Kriyas Shema, which is the obligation of acceptance of all Malchus Shamayim as well as all mitzvahs, it's as if right now he is renewing his commitment to Ol Malchus Shamayim. He is now, as it were, enthusiastically accepting the oil mitzvahs. It's a total commitment, obviously. So we don't have a more of a brazen contradiction than this. He's made sheker al atzma, even though it says kilu, but indeed it's as if he's saying false testimony, because he is disregarding the formulation of the mitzvahs that now he's being commanded. And since he's commanded and it's possible for him to implement it, so why is he not implementing it? So we see this as we mentioned a moment ago, an inner contradiction. So this could be the reason why it's ki'ilu meid sheker alatzma. It's a false commitment. It's a false acceptance, because we're dealing in a case where it can be implemented. He mentions the commandments that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzavehim, and he fails to implement it, a total disregard, a total neglect of fulfilling the mitzvahs that are mentioned in the parashas of Kriyas Shema. However, it does not appear that this is the correct pshat. Why? Because we can ask a question, Mali mitzvahs Tefillin, Umali mitzvahs mezuzah. Hello, the tzivuyim, the commandments of mitzvahs mezuzah, are also mentioned in the first two sections of Kriyas Shema. And therefore, we would have expected to find in the Gemara a statement of Kol HaKoirei Kriyas Shema B'loi mezuzah al pischoi or al beisoi ki'ilu meid sheker al atzmoi. Because the same reasoning applies to mezuzah, yet we do not find such a statement in the Gemara. So therefore we have to try to understand the pshat in a different manner entirely. And perhaps we have the rishus to explain the question by simply understanding the very yesod of mitzvahs Kriyas Shema. What basically is the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad? So Moron, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh Livracha, explains that Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim is basically to proclaim to the entire world Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Shema Yisrael, said Reb Aaron. Every single Jew is being addressed. We're reaching out to every single Jew. And we are now sending a message to every single Jew. Hashem Elokeinu, God our God, is Hashem Echad. Everything in the cosmic universe is botel mevutel, totally negated and nullified to one Rebbeinu Shel Olam. Because basically nothing more really exists, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is existence par excellence. He is the essence of reality, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being so kind and merciful and compassionate, has included us in His reality, as it were, and His existence, because basically there's only one existence. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one reality. And that's why the Rishonim told us that the kavanas of Kriyas Shema is Echad. Aleph stands for Echad, one and only one. He's the Yochid Gomul, and Ches is the Zayin Rikiyim, the seven firmaments, the Oretz, and also the globe. Daled of Echad is the Daled Rucha, is the four directions. Ein oid milvadoi. What's the gist of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Echad? What do we want every Jew to discern? Ein oid milvadoi, as we mentioned a moment ago. And therefore, Reb Aaron Kotler explained to us, when a Jew proclaims Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, his intention automatically is that all the Jewish people, b'chol mokom shehem, should be inspired and impacted by the message of Ein Oid Milvadoi, only one reality, one existence exists. And let's say there was a Jew who conceals himself, b'chadrei chadarim, or b'seisar or b'mistorim, he conceals himself totally, isolated, and he recites the Shema Yisrael with the proper kavanah, with the proper intention, and also with the proper kavanah insofar as the words are concerned. He now fulfills the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema, Kedinu Kedos, very fervently, very enthusiastically. He's mamlich HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the cosmic universe and everything that exists. So his words, Be'ezras Hashem, will emanate and radiate like lightning, and it's like the scientific process of emitting radiant energy in the form of waves and particles, and this will resound in every Jewish neshama, even in the most God-forsaken corner of the world. And we heard from Moran Rosh Yeshiva of Shner Kotler, that once Reb Aaron Kotler was together with a very distinguished person, and this distinguished person told over a story to Reb Aaron Kotler about someone who learned once upon a time in Slabotka, but he did not continue with the hashkafa of Slabotka. This individual, the Adam Gadol, told over the story to Reb Aaron, and he was 7 years senior to the person that he was speaking about. So Reb Aaron said he happens to know that they're first cousins. And interestingly, Reb Aaron said that he once was told by this Adam Gadol that he was by the Vachtnacht the night before Bris Milo by this individual. And Reb Aaron said, had you said when you were 7 years old, you were present by the Lailo before the Bris Milo, had you said more fervently, more enthusiastically. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Those are the psukim that children recite very innocently, with a child to the heart of enthusiasm. Had he said it with more kavanah, so this individual would not have fought for 1 second to do something against the hashkafa of Slabotka. That is the koyach, and that is the power that every Jew has potentially in the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We Jewish people, no question about it, believe be'emunah shleimot, that the movement of Kiruv Rechoikim, where we so laboriously try to be Mekarev Rechoikim, is not only based on mashpiyim who are Moiser Nefesh, no question about it, very dedicated to their tasks, and who travel to kibbutzim and moshavim in Eretz Yisrael and engage the secular Jews to basically find their real selves, their real identity, through amiable discussions and subsequent question and answer sessions. These are all the mediums and modes that are available to those that are involved in Kiruv Rechoikim. And no question about it, it's extremely important, and we have to utilize all the methods available to us to succeed in this great endeavor. However, according to the Baron Kotler, the Tachsis Apnimi, our strongest weapon, insofar as the exalted goal of Kiruv Rechoikim is concerned, which of course we want to succeed in this great endeavor, is the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, that if we pronounce it, formulate it with the proper intentions, with the proper feelings, it will reverberate in the hearts and souls of Acheinu, B'Sarenu, Beis Yisrael. Consequently, it's dependent on Shema Yisrael, the first Israel you're addressing, which is you yourself. So it's based, basically, fundamentally, first and foremost, you are speaking to yourself. And proportional to the emunah that you have in the Ein Oid Milvadoi, to that extent of emunah, to that extent of belief that you yourself have of Ein Oid Milvadoi, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, so to that extent it will be expressed to all. But first and foremost, the person has to make sure that he has the proper emunah. It has to be in the pnimius mamish, because if it's not in the pnimius, so it doesn't have that effect that is necessary to produce these results. Moshel Lamadav Doime is the Rambam in Hilchos Shuvah Halacha Gimel. There the Rambam states that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes the shikul, he weighs the avonos and the schuyas. No man can do it. The shikul ze eino lefi minyan ha-schuyas v'avonos. It does not depend on the numerical schuyas v'avonos. A person can have a few schuyas and many avonos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu nevertheless will grant this individual Chaim Aruchim in this world, and also Chaim Lo'ilam Haba, even though he might have more avonos than schuyas, because it does not depend numerically. So what does it depend on? So the Rambam says it's not the fi godlon. That means numerically. Elo yesh schus shu kineged kama avonos. On occasion, there's one schus which overweighs many, many transgressions. And where do we learn this from? This is from the son of Yerom ben Nevad. But the pasuk says, "Yan nimtza boy Dover Toiv El Hashem Elokei Yisrael Bebeis Yerovam. So the pasuk does not say Yan Osa Dover Toiv. The son of Yerovam ben Nevad tried to prevent the Oile Regolim from going to the Shtei Eglei Zov. Laid down on the road, prevented them physically from going to the Kaviyachol Dike bias of the Shtei Eglei Zov that Yerovam made, and not going to the Beis HaMikdash for the Oile Regolim. So why does it say Yan Nimtza Boi Dover Toiv? So the Malbim explains, for sure the son of Yerovam ben Nevad was no tzaddik. Nevertheless, a Dover Toiv Shenimtza Boi Hu Gadol. It was a pnimius. It's Nimtza Boi. In his pnimius hanefesh, this Dover Toiv. Yan Shu Bebeis Yerovam Shoy Meisitin Soy Ma'akvin Oisoy. And he had to overpower all the obstacles, impediments, and also the evil environment in the bias, in the house, in the home of Yerovam ben Nevad. He was able to overpower all these negative vibrations and do such a great act. So that's why the Malbim explains it's called Boy. Yan Nimtza Boy, because it was Boy in the Pnimius HaNefesh, and therefore the Chachamim Sheboisei Dor were maspidim, and he was legitimately, genuinely entitled to a certain status of greatness. This is the Yesod of, basically, we just were Marchiv Es HaDibur, but this is what Rebbe meant, that first and foremost, the Shema Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter also said it, is the first Yisrael, the Shema Yisrael, is the individual himself. And we're also familiar with the Yesod of Boy that the Riyah Kodesh said. Chaim Vital brings down Hashem the Riyah Kodesh. The Pasuk says, "V'remen Hashem el Moshe kach lo Yeshua ben Nun." He'll be your successor. Why Yeshua ben Nun? Ish asher ruach boy. You could have said Ish asher ruach olov. It says ruach boy. That means in the pnimius hanefesh. We know, says the Riyah Kodesh, that Elda Dumeida Misnam B'machadeh. In contrast to Yeshua ben Nun, that received the smicha direct from Moshe Rabbeinu, it says by Elda Dumeida Vayisharu Shnei Anoshim B'machaneh Vatonach Aleim Haruach. It says Vatonach Aleim Haruach. It doesn't say Ruach Boy. That was only B'chitzonius, says the Riyah Kodesh. And therefore we understand the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Zayin, that basically Yeshua said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Adoni Moshe Kloim. It's a disgrace that Moshe Rabbeinu was not the one that instilled upon them the Ruach. It was Vatonach Aleim Ruach. It came by itself. So Hatel Aleim Tzarchei Tzibur, so give them to do Tzarchei Tzibur, Vein Kalam Aleim, and therefore it will disappear. What's Shat Vein Kalam Aleim? Says Taisus, after Zayin, Haruach Kalo. The Ruach that they had, the great spiritual aspect that they had, was only Chitzonius, and therefore the pasuk stresses the Ruach was Aleim and not Bum. The Divrei Pi Chacham Chen. So this is what we first and foremost have to work on. So the truth of the matter is that we have a very fascinating example of this in very pragmatic terms, even though it's a little abstract, but we're going to try to bring a mashal, an illustration that will make it more practical and extremely pragmatic. We have, insofar as Klal Yisrael is concerned, two Koyanim Gedolim. We have a Kohen Gadol, that's Oved Avodas HaMikdash. He's the Kohen Gadol who is in charge of avodas hamikdash, and we also have a kohen gadol meshuach milchama that the gabei many dinim he has a din of a regular kohen gadol. Basically, we have two kohenim gedolim in Klal Yisrael, and as the Ran says, Seif Ksubis, they're supported Mishal Tzibur. Supported Mishal Tzibur. So the Mefarshim asked the question. The Shem Shmuel asked a simple question. We can understand why the Kohen Gadol of Avodas Hamikdash is supported Mishal Tzibur. Sorry for the interruption. We can understand why the Kohen Gadol that's Oved in Beis Hamikdash is supported by the Tzibur, because the Tzibur has tremendous benefits from him. Avodas Yom Kippurim, which is basically Avodas HaKapara, is officiated by the Kohen Gadol. The entire Avodas Yom Kippurim is not kosher, is not valid, Elo Boy, only by him, and every day he also brings Kaparas to Klal Yisrael with his Minchas Chavisa, Machzisoi, Baboikeru, Machzisoi, B'tzorayim. So we see that Slicha, Mechila, Kapara, that all the Jewish people need, is implemented by the Kohen Gadol Toli Boy. And Kol Hashana Kula, right, we know that he's Noitel Beroish. He is the predominant figure in Avodas HaMikdash on a daily basis. He's the central and the predominant figure in the entire Marocha, the entire system of Avodas HaKarbonis, Avodas HaKapara, Slicha, Mechilo. Now we have a different Kohen Gadol. That's the Kohen Gadol Meshuach Milchama, as we said a moment ago. Now going into all the halachic ramifications, but this Kohen Gadol is somebody who is basically concealed. Kohen Gadol Oved B'Mikdash is in the Alma de Isgalia, the revealed world. We see him on a daily basis, as we mentioned a moment ago, because he's in charge of the entire Marocha of Avodas HaMikdash. No question about it. However, this other Kohen Gadol is very, very possible that we will never see him, because his entire tafkid, his entire job is in case there's a milchama, he reads a few psukim. So we don't exactly understand why he's equated to a Kohen Gadol that is Oved B'Mikdash. It's very difficult to understand. What is his avodah, as it were, to read two psukim in case there will be a milchama? Now, if there will never be a milchama during his lifetime, correct, so he doesn't have what to do. And if there is a milchama, so his entire obligation to his unique job, quote unquote, is to read two psukim before the Jewish people undertake to do battle. Insofar as the halacha and the parish of Chayzre Mimareches HaMilchama is concerned, so according to Pshuta Shel Mikra, we know that the Shoitrim, they're the ones that read out the Psukim for those that have a right to be Chayzer from the Mareches HaMilchama. So as we mentioned a moment ago, it's a possibility you will not need him. In his entire lifetime, there will not be a milchama, so therefore he will not be needed. And let's say there is a milchama, correct? So now all of a sudden he steps out of the Alma de Iskasio, the concealed world where we did not see him, and he steps into the revealed world. He goes on a bimah and he recites two psukim. In Parashat Shoftim, we see that he recites two psukim. Shema Yisrael. Atem krevim hayom la milchama al oivechem. Al yerach levavchem. Do not be fear-stricken. Val tirod, don't be afraid. Val techapzu, val tahartzu. Mipneim. In other words, there's four levels of fear, of dread, of panic, perhaps. We're not that familiar with it, but they're 4 lavim. Why? Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'hoilech imochem lilochem lochem imoyevechem lo'ishia eschem. That's his entire job. And yet, he is supported Mishel Tzibur just like a Kohen Gadol Oived B'Mikdash. In other words, there's an equation that the Ran made between these 2 Kohenim Gedolim. It's as if Bechadav Machzor Machzinin is one category. We see it as 2 separate independent categories. One active in Avodas HaMikdash, and the other is quite passive unless there's going to be a special need in times of war. So how do we understand this? Number 2, the question is a very, very difficult question. When somebody goes into battle, how is it we instruct him not to be afraid and not to be seized by these levels of fear or fright? And should he succumb, he's over 4 lavim. Somebody's about to go into a fire of battle, difficult to tell him in very terse 1 or 2 sentences, don't be afraid, don't be terror-stricken. And the Rambam says that everyone who goes into battle has to go into battle with the kavanah, L'chamas Hashem, Adoni Nilcham, L'shem Yichud Hashem, and not to think about anything else, not his family, not anything else, not to be afraid of anything. Very difficult. It would appear that this is impossible to do because human nature does not lend itself to such lofty levels. The answer would appear to be to both of these questions that the Kohen, Mashruach Melchama, so he works laboriously, arduously, B'yigiyah and Amedos Kapayim, all the years, in order to find himself on a level of Vani, Kilvas Alekim Li Tov. Va'ani, the entire Vani. Doesn't say Kilvas Alekim Li Tov. David HaMelech says Va'ani, the entire I exist awareness. The entire Shasa, Gidim, Ramache Vorim, are permeated with the Kirvas Hashem Li Tov. And after he comes to a Madrega, where his whole existence is called Kuloi, Kirvas Hashem, so he realizes, he comes to the awareness that of Eino Ed Mulvadoi. It was a difficult avodah, 24 hours, around the clock, Yomim V'Leilos, day and night. He had to work on himself. And he reached these lofty heights. And when he reached these exalted heights, he becomes a Kli Mefoyar, a very, very unique medium for Dvarim Hayotzim Min Halev, Nichnosim B'Lev. Because he is called Kuloi in the Pnimius HaNefesh. It has overwhelmed him, has overpowered him due to his Avodah Kosher Shebemikdash, and now he's called Kuloi Dvarim Hayotzim Min Halev. And the Torah indeed attests to this fact, that his Kedusha and his Emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so great that when he says Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'hoilech imochem lihilochem lochem lo'ishia eschem, when he says those words, and when he says those words based on a background, a backdrop of Kedusha V'Taira, which he accumulated through his avodah of long days and nights, and his entire inner being and personality is absorbed with this Emunah and this Kedusha and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When he stands on the Bimah and he delivers his message to the Yotzei Milchama, they never discern this message of Hashem Elokeichem ha'hoilech imochem, he will accompany you, Lehilochin lechem, he will fight for you. You don't have to do anything. L'shiaschem, to bring about the salvation and the redemption. When he said those words, even if somebody would have read the parsha, would have learned the parsha 1,000 times, it was the first time that he discerned the proper message. Because it was impossible for him to discern this message beforehand. Only the Kohen Gadol Mashiach Melchama, it's possible for him to send out this message. Because the words emanating from this Kohen Mashiach Melchama is similar to a baskel that comes from heaven. It's as if there was a koil. These sentences emanated from Shmei Shemayim. To that extent, his personality consists of Kedusha, sanctity, and Pnimius, that it was Chayde Bechadrei Beten, and entered the Teichias of everyone who heard this message. It was Dvar Mayotzim in Pnimius Alev, and it was Nichnosim to Pnimius Alev of everybody who heard it. This was supernatural. It was a unique kayach of the Kohen Gadol Mashiach Melchama. And when he sent this message to the Yotzei Melchama, all natural fears and frights of the Yotzei Melchama will simply disappear, the Rega Kotan, in a split second. And it will be replaced with an all-powerful emunah on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will fight for them, the Kol Yochel will fight for them, and he will bring about their salvation. And every single Jew, when he recites the Shema Yisrael, must recite it with a specific koyach, a koyach mesuyim, as if he's addressing Klal Yisrael, similarly to the Kohen Gadol that stood on the bima, on the platform, and said over those two psukim, Shema Yisrael Kreim Mayoim, Lamucham Alei Vechem. And he's speaking into a high, powerful microphone on an elevated platform. He has to have the intellectual knowledge, but more than that, the emotional feeling and awareness that when he proclaims Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, his words will penetrate, will be choder bechadrei beten of each and every Jew. Ba'asher hu sham. But first and foremost, like we mentioned a moment ago, he has to discern this message, and he has to have total comprehension of Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Total comprehension. And should someone be'emes reach the madrega, and he should be mislabesh be'esel levushim with the emunah of Einod Malvadoi, and everything else he believes be'emunah shleimo is the ayin gomer, it's worthless. There's only one existence of Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's still not enough. For the regular Yid who can come to such madregas, he will not come to the madregas of the Kohen Gadol Mashiach Melchama, but will come to very, very lofty madregas. He'll be exalted. It's still not enough. Because he needs the Kabbalah Emunah of faith of Einod Milvadoi with a Hilchas Maisa, with mitzvahs Maisias. And the Yisod of Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shamayim is like the Chidush Yarim said, Allah Torah, Kili B'nei Yisrael Avodim. Kadosh Baruch Hu proclaims the Jewish people are Avodim to him. V'lo Avodim La'avodim. Avodai Heim. V'lo Avdei Paroi. We are Avdei Hashem. The highest level anybody can reach in this world. V'lo Avdei Paroi. So the Chidush Yarim explained that every Jew is different than a goy. Now we know. But every Jew, the Etzem Mahusa, is an essential creation, is indeed unique. In what sense? He's destined and designated by the Shkach Elyoina to be an Eved, to be a servant. He cannot be independent. He has to be a servant. Chidush Sharim said in Yiddish, Avodim muzin zeh zayin. The Jewish people have to be avodim. Of course, this is to be understood in a conceptual sense. If they want to undertake a process of purification, so they have to dedicate and devote themselves to be unqualifiedly Avdei Hashem. But if they do not undertake that process of total commitment, so they'll be Avdei Paroi. Eved Muzmin Zayin, they'll be Meshubid, and they'll commit themselves to the world of Hedonei, to the world of transgressions. It's either or. Interestingly is the extra koyach of Kedusha that the Kadmonim ascribed to Tefilin. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch also brings it down. The Rambam is in Perek Daled, Halacha Chaf Hei, states, Kedushas Tefilin is Kedusha Gedoylahi. It's a tremendous sanctity. Shekol Zman, Tefillin al Rosh Hashanah, as long as Tefillin are Rosh Hashanah, the head of somebody, they adorn, the crown of Tefillin adorns his head, and you have Tefillin al Rosh, so he is a Onov, and he's a Yorei Elokim, and he's Mefana Liba, the Divrei or Emes V'Tzedek. In other words, he's transformed. Mitzvah Tefillin transforms a person. Everyone Lefi Mashu Odom. And the Kedusha, which is assimilated in the individual through Mitzvah Tefillin, is basically a Kabbalah's oil Malchus Shomayim and a Kabbalah's oil Mitzvahs with a Hilchas Maisa B'Poyal. Not just B'Dibur. It's, in other words, the exact same Yesod of Kriyas Shema that we mentioned a moment ago, but it's that Yesod with a Hilchas Maisa Mitzvah. It's a Pa'ula. So now we understand the Gemara. So through the medium of Mitzvahs Maisa of Tefillin, so we understand that the Gemara told us that this has to be combined with the proclamation of Yichud Hashem that Kriyas Shema consists of. And if he fails to do so, it's K'meid Shekach Al Atzmoi, because one mitzvah is interdependent on the other. It's as if there's a din of Kriyas Shema Ma'akvois Tefillin and Tefillin Ma'akvois Kriyas Shema. So it's K'meid Shekach Al Atzmoi because he's not doing the complete mitzvah, as we mentioned a moment ago. The message of Kriyas Shema is only effective. It will only be poyel if a person first commits himself to the totality of Avodas Hashem, Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim, and Kabbalas Ol Mitzvahs. And we know, Al Pidin of the Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchas Tefillin Chaf Hei, it's brought down in all the Sidurim, we are mandated to say the Shem Yichud Kitcher before Anochas Tefillin. We don't find this anywhere, such as solemn and poignant words. These words are so solemn, so poignant, we don't find them anywhere, only in the Shem Yichud Kitcher before Hanochas Tefillin. And we say, V'tzivonu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us, Lo Niach Alayad, why? Lezichroin, Zeroya Netuya. Ushu Neged Alev, and the Tefillin, Shalyara Neged Alev, L'shabed Bozeh, to subjugate Taivas u'machshavas Libenu Lavoidosa Yizborach Shemoi V'ala Roish, which is Neged HaMoyach Shaneshome Shebemoichi Yimshar Chusha V'koichoisai Kulom Yir Mishubodim Lavoidosa Yizborach Shemoi. And similar to the words of the Kohen Gadol Mashiach Melchama, that pursue the purpose and bemis accomplish the goal of having each and every Yotzei Milchama, as the Rambam states in Hilchos Melachim Perek Zayin, that every Yotzei Milchama has to be loichem b'chol liboy u'b'chol nafshoy b'loi pachad v'kavanosai lekadesh es Hashem bilvad v'al yichud Hashem u'Yotzei Milchama. Likewise, when one wears his tefillin and simultaneously proclaims the Shema, he profoundly, in the deep recesses of his neshama, ruach, and nefesh, naran, discerns very well the message of Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, because the kiyum mitzvah tefillin instills a person with the entire Torah. The entire Torah, like it says, V'oyer l'chol lois al yodecha, l'zikaron b'neinecha, l'man tiyeh Torahs Hashem b'ficha. Kol ha-Torah kula, Kabbalas Oil Malchus Shemayim in toto, Kabbalas Ol Mitzvahs in toto. Thus, the combination of Shema Yisrael and Tefillin, he is made Eidus, Emes Alatzmo, like the Maharsha points out. Only if it's one without the other is Kilu made Eidus Shekar Alatzmo. But the Maharsha says, in Eidus, how many Eidim do we need? Apishnayim Eidim, Yokum Dovo. So the Yokum Dovo, the Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shamayim, the Ein Oid Milvadoi, that message, La'asmoi, which will emanate in the entire world and will ultimately find the Naicha and will resound in every Jewish neshama wherever they are, is Yokum. It'll be Yokum Davar, but it'll be Al Pi Shnayim Eidim. What are the Shnayim Eidim? Kriyas Shema and Mitzvah Tefilin. It's basically one Kiyum, one Yesod. Therefore, referring back to the original question, so we don't ask a person when he recites Kriyas Shema, where's your mezuzah? Because mezuzah is a separate independent mitzvah. Doesn't go together with Kriyas Shema. But we do ask him, where's your tefillin? Because tefillin is the sort of Kriyas Shema with the Hilchas Maaseh. We thank everybody for listening, and we hope that there was some sort of Toyelis involved. And Bez Hashem Yisbarach, we hope to be back next week in Mirat Hashem with another installment. In the meantime, everybody should have a Shefa, Bracha V'Atzlacha. It should be a Chodesh Elul of Rachamim, Chodesh HaRachamim, and Chasodim V'Toivos. Everyone should be Zeicha from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.